Czech President says China benefits from prolonged Russia-Ukraine war. UK says China's military expansion secrecy could lead to tragic miscalculation. United Nations, India will overtake China as the world's most populous country in April. China continues to increase coal power consumption despite carbon-neutral pledge. China's stonewalling on COVID probe met with resistance from U.S. Congress.
Czech President Petr Pavel warned that the Chinese regime benefits from the Russia-Ukraine war, as it wants to prolong the war. Therefore, Beijing cannot be trusted as a peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine. According to Politico, Petr Pavel said that if the status quo of the war is unchanged, the Chinese regime can take advantage of the war and has leverage over Russia, pushing Moscow to many concessions. Pavel said, "I believe that it is in China's interest to prolong the status quo, because it can push Russia to a number of concessions." His remarks come as the Chinese regime seems to try to mediate peace between Russia and Ukraine by proposing a 12-point plan for ending the war last month, while most of the West dismissed the proposal because it's too favorable to Russia. Some countries, like France, think that Beijing could play a key part in peace talks. The Czech leader asserted that China could get cheap oil and other resources from Russia in exchange for its no-limits alliance with Moscow. He added, "It is also good for China that the West is probably becoming a little bit weaker by supporting Ukraine." He concluded, "I don't think that China has a real interest to resolve the war in a short time." Pavel also warned that Beijing is learning from the war, saying, "China is taking lessons out of the conflict every day. They closely follow what Russia is doing, how the West is reacting." While most countries denounced Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, the Chinese Communist regime refused to condemn Russia. Instead, Beijing claimed that it was the US that was to blame for hyping the prospect of war. Xi Jinping visited Moscow last month to meet Putin to secure a no-limits partnership. The visit came just after an arrest warrant for Putin from the International Criminal Court, accusing him of war crimes in Ukraine. The Czech Republic is a strong voice against the Chinese regime's aggression toward Taiwan. Last month, the Speaker of the lower chamber of the Czech Parliament visited Taiwan with a delegation of 150 people. In 2020, Prague ended its sister city partnership with Shanghai when the city refused to recognize the One China policy.
British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said China should tell the world why it conducts military building activities in peacetime and suggested that its secret military plans could lead to a tragic miscalculation, Reuters reported on April 24th. His remarks were made at Mansion House in London's historic financial district on Tuesday, April 24th, amid the low ties between the two countries as London restricted Chinese investment over national security concerns. Cleverly said, "I urge China to be equally open about the doctrine and intent behind its military expansion, because transparency is surely in everyone's interest and secrecy can only increase the risk of tragic miscalculation." Regarding Taiwan's future, he said his country is willing to cooperate with allies in the Indo-Pacific and called on China to be clear about its military intentions. The Chinese embassy in London has yet to respond to a request for comment. During his speech, Cleverly reminded us of China's detention of Uyghurs in forced labor camps in the Xinjiang region. He told of China building a 21st century version of the Gulag archipelago and locking up over 1 million people at the height of this campaign, often for doing nothing more than observing their religion. As for China, the Chinese Communist Party, as usual, has vehemently denied these allegations of abuse in Xinjiang. The United Nations announced on Monday, April 24th, that India's population would match China's by the end of this month and then overtake China as the world's most populous country. The announcement from the UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs came after the UN Population Fund said last week that India would have nearly 3 million more people than China by the middle of 2023. DESA said China will soon see its long-held status as the world's most populous country. It also added that the exact date that the Indian population will surpass China is just an estimate. Due to the uncertainty associated with estimating and projecting populations, the specific date on which India is expected to surpass China in population size is approximate and subject to revision. The median UN projection finds India's population will reach 1.5 billion by mid-century, but officials stressed it could be much lower or higher. According to DESA projection, China's population has started declining and will be below 1 billion by the end of this century. Meanwhile, India's population is expected to continue growing for several decades. DESA added that the growth of the older population in India is much lower than China's. China's population decline is mainly due to decades of imposing a strict one-child policy for married couples. The Chinese regime ended the policy in 2016. It allowed couples to have 3 children in a major policy shift in 2021. Last year, the official data showed that China's population declined for the first time in 6 decades. The Chinese Communist Party is known for demographic data manipulation, so the delay in its 2020 census data was suspicious, and experts question whether the actual population figure is much lower than the questionable official data. Official data showed that the Chinese Communist Party local authorities approved more new coal power consumption in the first quarter of this year than for all of 2021. Breitbart, citing analysis from climate alarmist Greenpeace, reported that from January through March, CCP provincial authorities approved at least 20.45 gigawatts of new coal power capacity. This figure is more than double the 8.63 gigawatts from a year ago and higher than the 18.55 gigawatts that received the green light in 2021. The outlet noted that the surge in coal-fired power station approvals had raised concerns that Beijing will likely be unable to keep its promise to reduce emissions between 2026 and 2030 and achieve carbon neutral before 2060. In addition, the move also indicates that Beijing will put heavy investment in coal power plants while neglecting other green renewable energy sources, including solar, wind, and hydro, unlike the rest of the world. Per Breitbart, the U.S. plans to turn away from coal and oil in its energy production. Meanwhile, all the European countries have also vowed to ditch coal, oil, and nuclear power generation. Instead, those nations will focus more on green energy sources to reach zero emissions in the future. According to Greenpeace, China, the world's biggest polluter, approved over 90 gigawatts of new coal-fired capacity in 2022. Reuters cited a February research report by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air and Global Energy Monitor, which report that the new coal-fired plant approvals could have reached more than 100 gigawatts last year, indicating a 300% increase from 2021 and the biggest since 2015. Shea Wenwen, Greenpeace climate and energy campaigner, told Breitbart that more investments in coal power stations risk climate disasters, locking us into a high-carbon pathway. Shea commented, the 2022 coal boom has clearly continued into this year. Regarding China's carbon emissions, the World Bank said that the country emits 27% of global carbon dioxide and a third of greenhouse gases annually worldwide. China's decarbonization plan requires an additional investment of up to $17 trillion for a vast development in green infrastructure and technology for the energy and transport industries. As reported by SCMP, Beijing is tightening control over the carbon footprint of the digital infrastructure sector. Although more minor, the industry is classified as a significant decarbonization target, just like other traditional heavy-emitting sectors, including energy and transportation. The outlet, citing data from Greenpeace last April, reported that carbon emissions from digital infrastructure in China, the world's most extensive 5G network, are expected to spike 152% to 310 million tons in 2035 from 2020. U.S. House lawmakers are pushing back after Chinese officials criticized their probe into the origins of COVID-19. The legislators accused China of trying to sabotage the investigation and demand that they make numerous researchers available to testify. The Hill reported on April 24th that the chairman of the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic forwarded the request to the Chinese ambassador to the U.S., Qin Gang. Chairman Rep. Brad Wenstrup blasted the embassy for attempting to interfere in the probe through an email to committee members issued on April 14 by a counselor with China's embassy, Li Shang. Li's letter indicated China's opposition to a House hearing that took place on April 18, centered on the efforts of the intelligence community to ascertain the origins of COVID-19. Li wrote in the email that the Chinese embassy was reaching out to express our grave concern regarding the COVID-19 origins hearing to be chaired by Congressman Wenstrup on next Tuesday. We firmly oppose it. In his letter, Wenstrup said Beijing's interference is unacceptable and will not impede the Select Subcommittee's efforts. He also said the U.S. encouraged China to stop and instead cooperate with the numerous international investigations into the origins of COVID-19. Wenstrup assessed that China should make at least 5 officials with ties to the military, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the state's health ministry available for the investigation. Wenstrup's letter read, "Continued stonewalling by China will not only harm the globe's ability to predict, prepare, protect, and prevent the next pandemic, but will also, as your staff so eloquently said, fail to promote international solidarity."